Blade, the flat cutting edge of a tool or weapon. Also Blade. Now this guide is going to be about Blade, the newest 5-star destruction unit that specializes in dealing tons and tons of AoE damage in exchange for his HP. He's easy to play, he works in a lot of teams, and for me personally, it means I won't be building Arlen anytime soon. Sorry, Arlen. Now, although Blade is really strong, I understand that constantly spending health to do damage might be pretty intimidating. But don't worry, it's not as bad as you might think, and as always, I'm here to explain. Basically, like every other destruction character in the game, Blade just wants to do as much damage as he possibly can. He does end up spending a lot of health to do this, but thankfully, not only do his abilities help manage this, but since they also scale off his max HP, building him tankier both increases his damage and his general survivability. Though his unique scalings do cause a problem that we'll have to address later in the video, but for now, just make note of this. But to start things off with what makes Blade really good, we got Blade's skill, in which he spends 1 skill point and consumes 30% of his max HP to enter Hellscape mode. Being in Hellscape gives him a total damage buff, but more importantly enhances his basic attack for 3 turns, excluding the turn he casts the buff. So it effectively lasts for 4 turns. Blade will basically want to be in this mode all the time, because now whenever he attacks, he loses 10% of his max health to deal a blast of AoE wind damage, gain 30 energy, and heal some life back when he damages a weakness broken enemy thanks to his A4 trace. You're going to be spamming this move all the time in the fight, so for those that keep asking me this in the comments, yes, he's good on auto. The only drawback to this move is that his attacks don't build skill points while they're enhanced, but because he only needs to spend 1 point every 4 turns to activate his skill, he's essentially one of the most SP efficient damage dealers in the entire game. But now I know what you might be thinking, constantly losing HP every time he attacks seems like a pretty big drawback, but actually it's more like a feature, and it's good for 2 reasons. The first being that his talent gives him a counter every time he spends health for his abilities or whenever he takes damage. Once Blade reaches 5 stacks, he immediately launches a follow-up attack that hits every enemy and heals himself for a quarter of his max HP. His talent does quite a lot of damage thanks to its scalings and the damage buff from his A6 trace, while also being his main source of self-sustain, especially when combined with the healing bonus from his A2 trace. 5 stacks might seem like a lot, but considering that any source of damage will get him a stack, and because these assholes exist, depending on who you're fighting, his talent will trigger more often than you might expect. Just keep in mind that if Blade is CC'd in any way, his follow-up won't come out until he's back to normal. This talent is part of the reason why Blade likes getting smacked around, with the other part being because of his ultimate. Blade's ultimate basically ties the whole character together as it sets his current health to half of his max HP and deals damage that scales off the total health he's lost before using it. There's a cap at 90% of his maximum life, and it resets every time he uses his ultimate. So because of these 2 things, you're gonna have to lose a lot of HP to get the most damage out of it. This seems like a lot to constantly achieve, but luckily, Blade's ultimate alone helps manage this. For one, if your HP is above half, any HP lost when activating his ultimate counts as consuming HP, therefore adding to the death sentence bonus while also granting a count to his talent. So the closer you are to max health before activating this, the bigger the bonus his ultimate will provide. Or if you happen to be in a pinch because you've taken too many hits, you can instead use Blade's ult as a pseudo heal to bring his life back to half. With a typical rotation, Blade will get enough energy for his ultimate by turn 4 and spend 80% of his life on his own. So when you consider external factors like enemy attacks and extra healing, you'll easily be hitting the cap with the possibility of getting his ultimate in less than 4 turns. And finally, if you need a head start on his talent and ultimate, you can use his technique which consumes HP to deal AoE wind damage to enemies. Now in regards to his trace priorities, I would level his basic attack first, seeing that you use it all the time. However, his talent and ultimate contribute a lot to his overall damage, and his skills damage buff literally affects everything else he does, so I recommend equally prioritizing each of those. Now before we move on, there is something important I wanted to clear up, and this is for all 64 you Arlen mains out there. I've been seeing a lot of Arlen and Blade comparisons ever since Blade was announced. Arlen jokes aside, while they do both consume HP for their attacks, the way they function, the way you should team build around them are vastly different. You see, Arlen spending HP is beneficial because he does more damage the lower his health is. So ideally, he wants to be at low health all the time, therefore needing a shielder to constantly maintain his low life. Though it's admittedly pretty stressful maintaining his low HP all the time, but his traces and Eidolons do help manage that. While in contrast, Blade wants to spend HP not to meet a threshold, but because he scales off of the amount of health he's spent. In order to trigger his talent and supplement the bonus for his ultimate, Blade also wants to take damage from enemies, unlike Arlen. In order to comfortably do this, he wants to stay relatively healthy and require a healer to keep up with his spending. So in summary, what I'm trying to say is that both Blade and Arlen have different strengths, weaknesses, and your reasons for using either will vary. I'm pretty confident that there's going to be many more characters in the future that spend health as a mechanic, so I'm sure this topic is going to come back up again. But in my opinion, just invest into whoever you want, pick whoever's the most fun, because at the end of the day, it's your account. Now, while we're still on the topic of investing, if you don't mind dipping into your Kafka funds, let's quickly go over Blade's Eidolons to see if any of them are worth getting. Starting off with his E1, Blade cuts the deepest in Bruh, why is this so edgy? Never mind, his name is Blade, why am I asking? Blade's E1 essentially increases the damage his ult does to the enemy you targeted with. The wording is a bit confusing, but basically it just increases the HP loss scaling part of his ultimate, making him do 50% more damage to the center enemy. Next up, we got his E2, which increases his crit rate while he's in Hellscape state. You'll be in this mode all the time, so just assume it's a permanent crit rate buff. 15% crit rate is pretty substantial for any character, and you'll really understand its value once we get to the build section of the guide. Next up is his E3, which increases his ultimate and talents levels, and then now we got his E4, which increases his max health by 20% every time his health drops to 50% or lower, capping at 40% at 2 stacks. Just like his E2, just assume Blade will have 40% bonus HP all the time, as he can easily stack it twice in a single rotation, with a bonus almost equivalent to having an extra main stack relic, and considering all of his abilities scale the most with his max HP, it's obvious to see how good this upgrade is for him. Moving on, now we got Blade's E5, which increases his basic attack and skills levels. Death by 10 Lord's Gaze perfectly describes that one incident I had back in high school, while also being a very solid Eidolon, as more levels into those traces is a nice increase in his DPS. And finally, we got his E6, which lowers the requirement to trigger his talent to 4 stacks, while also increasing his damage scaling with his HP by 50%. Besides his E4, this is the other Eidolon that's just really nutty. Needing one less stack means Blade gets his talent 20% more often, not only meaning more procs, but also means more energy for his ultimates and more sustain from him overall. Combine this buff with his E4, and now your Blade is literally unkillable. Now, if there's an Eidolon I recommend stopping at, it'd be a E0, because he's fine at 1 copy. But if you're a really big Blade fan, you'll see the biggest power spikes at E4 and E6. You do you, and enjoy your next month's meals. Blade is definitely one of these stronger damage dealers we got in recent patches, but don't go expecting Sede levels of power. Hoyo messed up with her. But he's definitely a very strong unit that can carry you through any late game content in Star Rail right now. But remember that problem I said we needed to talk about? Well, as we go on through his best Lightcones, you'll pick up on what it is pretty quickly. Starting with his best in slot, we have his signature Lightcone. It gives crit rate, max HP, and the wearer a damage buff on their next attack whenever they consume HP or are attacked by an enemy. This Lightcone has everything that Blade needs: a lot of health, free crit rate, and a damage buff that applies to all of his attacks except for when he ults below half health. But now for the next best option, we have the 4-star Lightcone Secret Vow, which increases the damage dealt by the wearer and doubles the bonus against enemies with a higher HP percentage than the wearer. The unconditional bonus itself is really good, and since Blade naturally lowers his own health against tankier enemies, he'll easily be able to get the full benefit of the Lightcone. Though, because Blade wants to stay healthy, it'll be much harder to maintain this bonus the longer a fight goes on. That's it. Those are all the Lightcones. You see, the problem I alluded to earlier isn't really with Blade, but rather the current selection of available Lightcones. Although he has dual scalings with HP and attack, his attack ratios themselves leave much to be desired. Therefore, Lightcones that unconditionally buff crit stats, give a damage bonus, or give HP will have the most impact on Blade's DPS. Criteria that unfortunately only apply to the aforementioned Lightcones. If I had to describe the difference in power levels, picture something delicious in your head. Food. I meant food. Maybe a beautiful smoked salmon Benedict, or a tall stack of pancakes drizzled in syrup. Any savory, mouth-watering culinary delight that you could possibly imagine. But now picture eating at Taco Bell, and they mess up your order. That's kind of what it's like. So with that analogy in mind, let's go over the other Lightcones you could possibly use. For one of the better options, you could use something irreplaceable for the high health stat and the total damage buff for whenever the wearer takes damage. Blade has a higher taunt value than other units, and he wants to get hit, so the damage buff will trigger frequently enough unless you're unlucky. But next up, you can also use Fall of an Eon from the SU shop. Blade can benefit from the damage buff that's activated on weakness break, but it is fairly conditional and only lasts for 2 turns, so you'll mainly be using this for its base stats. Now for the 4-star Lightcones, as a reminder, they're all pretty copium. They all grant attack and mostly have pretty weak conditional effects, so honestly just choose whatever you have available. To put it nicely, Nowhere to Run from the Battle Pass is usable, as it gives the highest attack out of all the 4-star Lightcones. However, the heal is not too useful as you need to defeat an enemy to trigger it, and an attack scaling heal on a character that doesn't have much attack isn't really healing much. Next, we have Wolf Walk Time from the Forgotten Hall shop. The damage buff it provides benefits Blade as long as you have a teammate that can maintain a burn or bleed dot on the enemy. It's a pretty niche and situational pick, but we're already pretty desperate here, so not much we can do about it. And now we do have a couple of 3-star Lightcones you could use in the early game, or if you have literally nothing else. I don't really recommend using the 3 stars as their base stats are incredibly low, but if you have no other choice, I recommend you use Collapsing Sky for the basic attack damage bonus, as Blade is going to be spamming his enhanced attack all the time. And finally, you can use Mutual Demise as it gives crit rate as long as the wearer stays below 80% life. Like I mentioned earlier, our current Lightcone selection for Blade is pretty poor. The power difference in what's best versus what's okay is pretty steep, but at least his best relic set makes up for any terrible Lightcone choice. The 4-piece Longevous Disciple set is amazing for the extra max HP and the stacking crit buffs. As we've established earlier, Blade wants max HP, crit stats, and total damage buffs, and this Relic set provides 2 out of the 3. This set also has the added bonus of being in the same pool as the new speed set, so spend all your fuel here, you won't regret it. But while you're in the middle of farming for good Longevous pieces, you can also do a mix of 2-piece Longevous and 2-piece Eagle Twilight line for the bonus wind damage. 4-piece Eagle is not too useful on Blade as he doesn't spam his ultimate enough to benefit from the AV advance. While mixing both the two sets is not as good as 4-piece Longevous, both 2-piece bonuses are still very good on Blade. And finally, if you got nothing better to put on him, the 4-piece Musketeer is also usable for the basic attack damage bonus and the extra speed. The attack from the 2-piece set bonus is pretty mediocre on Blade, so if you're going to use it, be sure to use the full set. For the planner set, you can go Inert Salcedo for the bonus crit rate and the damage bonuses for his ultimates and follow-up attacks. Not only do the damage bonuses greatly benefit Blade, but also when you combine the total crit rate from his Relics, Minor Traces, and Lightcone, you're already looking at a 59% crit rate for Blade before we even talk about main stats and substats. Blade could also use the new Rudolin Arena set for the bonus crit and the basic attack damage bonus when the user reaches 70% crit rate. Now, Blade won't fully benefit from the bonuses as his skill doesn't do damage, but the crit rate requirement is totally doable if you want to use this set. The 20% damage bonus it provides the basic attacks is pretty good, and just like Longevous, shares a pool with the new Broken Keel Planner set, making it a worthwhile set to farm for. Now, regardless of what stats you should prioritize, Blade is going to want HP, crit stats, and speed. But depending on your choice of Lightcone and Relic sets, your top piece needs are going to vary. Like I mentioned earlier, with all of his best in slot gear, you're going to have 59% crit rate, in which case you're going to want a crit body. If you plan on using Rudolin Arena, getting the 11% remaining crit is completely doable with just substats, so a crit rate top is overkill. But since not everyone is going to get a signature Lightcone, without it, he'll be sitting at 41% crit rate instead. If you're still going to try and use Rudolin Arena, then I would recommend using a crit rate top at that point, as getting the remaining 29% in crit substats is pretty steep. But if you're running Salcedo, I would still recommend using a crit damage top, as he still has plenty of crit rate without a signature. The rest of his Relic stats are pretty straightforward, so in summary, you're going to want a crit rate or crit damage top, depending on your breakpoints, speed or HP boots, a wind damage sphere, and an HP rope. For substats, prioritize crit stats, HP, and speed, and on the very end, attack, if it makes you feel better when your rolls are bad. But now, moving on to team building of Blade, this is normally when I'd say to pick your favorite healer or shielder. But since Blade wants to take damage, that means you only want to put a healer on his team. Not only would using a shield hinder Blade's game plan, just having a preservation character or any character with a high taunt value will reduce Blade's chances of getting hit. So although someone like March raises taunt value with her shield, it doesn't mean much when Blade isn't taking damage. So on that note, for the best overall healer, we have Luocha, not only for his cleanse and massive heals, but also because of their synergy. Since Luocha wants to trigger his auto heal to gain stacks of energy, Blade can easily force it out with his ultimate and basic attacks. Additionally, because of Luocha's healing field, Blade can essentially refund the cost of almost all of his abilities. Now for the other 5-star healer, we got Bailu, who also has good synergy with Blade as her talent's healing can keep Blade healthy when he gets hit, and her A4 trace can increase his maximum health, thus increasing his damage. And if you get too carried away, Bailu's talent can bring him back to life while also retaining Blade's stacks. And although she doesn't have a cleanse, because we want dots on Blade, this at least means we can heal him without removing the dot debuff. And finally, we have Natasha, the 4-star healer we got for free. While Natasha's immediate healing is not at the level of Luocha and Bailu's, the continuous healing from her talent is fairly substantial and her cleanse is insanely useful. And because of her low-cost ultimate, she can use it more frequently to manage not only Blade's health, but the whole team's as well. But now for possible supports, because attack buffs have the least benefit on Blade, a nihility character like Palo or Silverwolf are fantastic teammates for the defense shredding abilities. Bronya is also amazing at pair with Blade, as her skills damage buffs and her ult's crit buffs directly benefit him. And since Blade doesn't spend skill points, Bronya's skills' inherent weakness of costing 2 SP is effectively removed. And finally, because they share an element, Bronya has the option of using Planetary Rendezvous to passively buff his damage. So when you consider everyone I've listed so far, this is Blade's best team. Yep, 4 or 5 stars. Reminds me of another win character on launch. Now, if you don't have Team 5-star ready, because Blade is so SP efficient, he also works really well as a sub DPS. Ironically, pairing it with a low taunt value hunt character is a decent idea as he makes up for their lack of AoE coverage. Now, this isn't the most optimal thing to do, but like his Lightcones, there's not a lot of characters that work well with him, so we gotta work with what we got. So if you don't mind traumatizing him, you can put Dan Heng on a team with Blade. A character with surprisingly good synergy is Yen Qing. Yeah, I know, another 5-star. As his taunt value is lower when his talent Soul Steal is active, raising Blade's chances of getting attacked just a little bit more. He can spend all the skill points he wants while Blade soaks up hits and makes up for Yen Qing's lack of AoE damage. For a double DPS team, you'll want to run a support that can buff both characters' damage, so Palo and Silverwolf are still really good on the squad. But if you want to run a Harmony character, someone that works well in a double DPS team is Yukong, a character that we get for free with the 1.2 patch. Her skills attack buffs are great for double DPS teams, and her ultimate's massive crit buffs benefit Blade an insane amount. But unfortunately, she's not the most intuitive character to play, so if you're interested in her at all, check out the guide that's on your screen right now. But that's really it for Blade. Subscribe and like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.